What if I told you it was possible to fall in love with one of the most feared creatures on the planet? Well, in this video, I will tell you of a man whose story undoubtedly serves as a real-life example in support of just how possible this is. This is the terrifying tale of the legendary Rodney Fox, who on one fateful day during a spearfishing competition would fall victim to a gruesome great white shark attack in Australian waters that would go down in history as the most famous shark attack survival story ever reported. Born in Adelaide, Australia in 1948, Rodney Fox had been determined to make his mark beyond the comforts of his hometown and see what the world had to offer. Taking every opportunity presented to him to explore further and further away from home as he was growing up, Rodney would throw himself into a variety of outdoor activities such as fishing, hunting, and diving. Little did he know, however, that these favorite pastimes of his would mark the beginnings of an illustrious career at sea, paving the path that would one day lead him to becoming world-renowned for major contributions to the study of ocean wildlife. Taking advantage of practically living on the beaches of Australia, Rodney would take to spearfishing in his teenage years, displaying an impressive aptitude for not just finding great catches in rapid fashion, but also displaying a unique ability that pro spearfishermen would call reading the water. Rodney's favorite hobbies would soon be complemented by his physical prowess, as he'd in his prime develop elite agility, strength, and balance, attributes which allowed him to masterfully launch himself onto a surfboard while dodging incoming waves, all while simultaneously hunting out large catches. It's December 8th of 1963, and the annual South Australian Spearfishing Championships are about to begin. Rodney, who was now 23 and already a former champion at this point, takes to the water in search of a large reef fish. As he scans the water for movement, little does he know that a large great white shark lurks just a few meters away. And worst of all, it's stalking him. It's important to note that as per a recent article, I'll leave the link in the description for you, published by Statista.com, surfers and board sports enthusiasts account for 51% of all shark attacks in the past year, while swimmers and waders accounted for 39%. Body surfing or horseplay, they come in at 6%, with snorkeling and free diving at 4%. The Florida Museum explains that the percentages of these dangerous shark encounters have risen over the past few years, and this mainly comes down to the high and still rising number of people that are engaging in activities that encroach on their territories. Just something to keep in mind before venturing into the waters that these prehistoric ocean predators inhabit. After hours of continuous diving and hauling his catches to shore for weighing, Rodney's informed that he had to catch a big dusky morwong if he were to have any chance of catching up with the competition leader. The former defending champ, undaunted by fatigue, thereby pushes himself onward and swims out to an area where few other competitors dare to venture, beyond the reef into the depths reaching 25 yards. After hours of anticipation, Rodney finally spots one large morwong hanging among some rocks, which hadn't yet noticed his presence, at which point he cautiously stalks forward as he slowly began applying pressure to the trigger. He has a perfect shot. Rodney is struck with such brute force that at first he thought he'd been hit by a submarine. He snaps out of his frozen state moments later, only to realize that he was latched between the jaws of an enormous great white shark. Helplessly watching ocean water roar by him faster than he'd ever imagined it could, and knowing any hesitation could prove fatal at this point, a determined Rodney, fueled by his adrenaline-filled muscles, successfully manages to gouge his finger into one of the shark's eyes, causing it to release him from its mighty grip, at which point Rodney makes a life-altering decision. Just as the shark released him, Rodney tries to use one of his arms to push the shark away from him, but to his shock and horror, instead watches his arm disappear into the shark's mouth, as it forcefully bit down on it. In a desperate attempt to jerk his arm out of the shark's mouth, its jagged teeth saw into its flesh, bones, and tendons, rendering it useless, at which point the shark swims off, leaving an understandably traumatized Rodney frozen in shock once again, except now immersed in a pool of his own blood. Upon snapping back to his senses, Rodney then retrieves his mask and spear gun, and thereby begins desperately swimming towards the surface as fast as he could, when suddenly, once again, the persistent great white attacks. Engaged in yet another life-or-death struggle, Rodney then attempts to wrap his arms and legs around the middle of the shark's massive torso in an attempt to keep it from biting him. Realizing that this particular white's massive girth made it nearly impossible for him to secure a grip on its body, Rodney then manages to kick his way to the surface, emerging out of the water a few seconds later with huge gasps for air, at the same time noticing the water around him turn more and more blood red by the second. And like something out of a horror movie, the great white's massive gray head and beady eyes rise out of the bloody water near him, at which point Rodney attempts to kick the shark, but misses. To his good fortune, at least for now, his reaction would be enough to cause the hungry shark to turn its attention to his buoy full of fish, swallowing it whole instantly. As the shark turned downwards and begins swimming away towards the ocean depths, a horrifying realization strikes Rodney. He suddenly recalls that his buoy had been tethered to his lead weight. And so, while gathering all the energy and courage within him, Rodney takes a huge, deep breath, knowing what would come next. And with a vicious tug, he's once again hurled through the water, except this time, the great white is rapidly pulling him into deeper waters. Rodney grasps desperately around his weight belt, searching for the quick release, at which point his consciousness begins fading, and everything starts getting fuzzy. And so, realizing that he's fighting a losing battle, Rodney at this point nearly begins to accept defeat, when once more, to his good fortune, the rope had been partially cut during the attack and weakened just enough for it to snap, enabling him once more to swim to the surface. Just moments later, some nearby fishermen noticed some disturbance in the water, followed by a growing pool of blood, and it was at this point that Rodney resurfaces. And as if his ordeal couldn't get any more horrifying, Rodney's stomach and intestines would then spill out from his gut onto the boat floor as soon as the men would pull him on board. Miraculously, Rodney would survive this horrific ordeal, despite serious injuries including punctures across his chest, blood-filled lungs, and a severed arm. He would receive over 500 stitches to repair the damage caused by the multiple lacerations he'd received throughout his body. In an unusual twist, and despite having survived an experience so traumatizing that it would have most people shuddering at even the thought of a shark, Rodney would on the contrary redefine his experience as one that he could use as an opportunity to not just learn more about these ancient creatures, but also preserve their existence in our oceans. Rodney Fox would go on to revolutionize the entire field of marine exploration by designing the very first shark cage for underwater viewing, allowing humans to have an unprecedented, up-close and personal experience with even the deadliest of them.